Hey guys, welcome to week 5, the Abrahamic covenant. This is an amazing topic. I love this topic. It is crazy to think that God established this covenant so long ago with Abraham, and yet it still affects the human race today and mankind today. I should put it that way, mankind today. So as we get ready to talk about the Abrahamic covenant, there was just a few things I wanted just to share with you. The first one comes from Genesis chapter 15. I'm just going to read a few verses here. Genesis chapter 15 is during the parts where the Lord is starting to make this covenant with Abraham, and he's going to promise him land, posterity, and priesthood. And we know the story that Abraham's wife, Sarah, is barren. We know that she's going to give her handmaiden Hagar to Abraham, and he's going to have Ishmael through Abraham. But before all of that happens, the Lord is speaking to Abraham, and he tells him, hey, I'm going to give you these things. I want to make this covenant with you. And in Genesis chapter 15, verse 8, he, meaning Abraham, said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? How will I know that I will get these things? This is understandable. I don't think he's looking for a sign. He's not like, he's not a sign seeker. But his wife is barren, and he's been promised posterity. And he says, how will I know? Are you sure? Are you sure this is a blessing you have for me? And then verse 9, I love verse 9 and 10. And he, God, Jehovah, said unto him, Abraham, okay, so take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he, meaning Abraham, took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against the other, but the birds divided he not. That seems kind of I don't even know what's going on as we first read it, as we read it the first time. But I think something's happening here in these chapters that's just absolutely amazing. The Lord wants to make that covenant with Abraham. Now, remember, a covenant is a promise, and an ordinance is the action that we do to show the covenant. And so, for example, in the sacrament, the prayer mentions the things that we covenant to do. But the ordinance is the physical action of taking the bread. Same thing with baptism. Okay, the baptism, there's a covenant there, a promise there, but the ordinance is the thing that we do, the physical thing that we do to keep when we're making that covenant. I wish I understood that a lot more before I went to the temple for my first time. I thought I'd be sitting in the temple and they would, it'd be like a sacrament meeting. I had no idea that I would be making covenants and performing ordinances. And that, wow, once I realized that, after I had already gone, I went, okay, now I understand what's going on a little bit more. But right here in Genesis 15, the covenant that God is making is the Abrahamic covenant, where he's promising him again priesthood, land, and posterity. But the ordinance is this sacrifice that he's going to do. So he takes the heifer, the she-goat, the ram, the turtle dove, and the young pigeon. Now, I love looking at these three animals and seeing how they represent Abraham and his family. A heifer is a cow that has not born a calf yet. After 3 years, it's doubtful that the cow will be able to produce if it hasn't already. Do you see how a heifer is a great symbol for his wife? A she-goat is just a female goat. But once they have a kid, they're called nanny goats. I'm just reading my notes that I have here next to Genesis 15. But goats are often used in the scriptures as symbols of an uncovenanted people. For example, the parable of the lambs and the goats, or separating the sheep from the goats. And so again, we've got a she-goat, we've got a female goat that hasn't had kids yet, but she's not of the covenant. I think this is a representation of Hagar. And then you have a ram. A ram is an uncastrated male sheep. So a sheep or a ram, this is a covenanted animal. In the scriptures, this is the animal that they use to talk about the covenant. And so this is a covenanted animal who is still able to produce offspring. And so I think we see Abraham, the ram, Sarah, his wife, the heifer, and Hagar, the she-goat. And they're all making this covenant and this ordinance that they're making here. A turtle dove and a young pigeon. Turtle doves and pigeons were used pretty much interchangeably from what I understand in the scriptures. And it's when you didn't have enough money, if you were extremely poor and you didn't have enough money for a lamb as a sacrifice, you could bring 2 turtle doves or a turtle dove and a young pigeon. And so we see that we've got the Lord there in this covenant. So he takes these animals, the heifer, the she-goat, and the ram, and it says he divides them in the midst. What he's doing is he's cutting it in half. He kills the animal, but he cuts it in half, and he's laying each piece one against the other. So he lays down the pieces, and then he waits at this scene of these 3 animals that have been sacrificed and killed and are laying there. It says the birds come to eat it, and he pushes the birds away, and the sun goes down, and he falls asleep. Verse 17, and it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp passed between those pieces. So a smoking furnace and a burning lamp, that's the symbolism for God right there. And he's passing between those pieces. So those pieces are on the ground, and the smoking fire and the burning lamp, the smoking furnace, and the burning lamp is traveling between these pieces. In ancient times, this is what I've written down in my footnotes. In ancient times, when such a covenant was made, the individual passing between the carcasses was essentially saying, may I also be cut in two if I do not keep my part of this covenant. So when God makes this covenant with Abraham, with the pieces lying on the ground, Abraham and God are both saying, look, this is what I deserve if I break this covenant. The great thing about this is God's never going to break his covenant with us. I know that when we make these covenants with God, that if we hold our part, he will hold his part, and we will get what the Lord has promised. It goes back to Doctrine and Covenants 82. I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. But when you do not what I say, you have no promise. When we keep this covenant, he will too. Now, covenants are so important. I often think of when I was on my mission back in Argentina. There was a zone conference where our mission president, a very good-meaning guy, he was a great mission president. But there was one month where he was all about, hey, you're going to make covenants with God about baptisms. And you tell the Lord how many baptisms you want this month. And you make a covenant and you promise to do X, Y, and Z. And if you do X, Y, and Z, the Lord will come through and you will baptize as many people as you want. And he really is a mission president, has the ability to do sometimes. I mean, we were just like, yeah, I'm going to make these covenants. I'm going to do this. And we left that zone conference and we made our covenants. And the next month he gathered us all together, and we were expecting like a, return and report how the covenant has made, or how you have done making this covenant, and how many baptisms did you get. And instead, he didn't mention covenant making at all. It was almost like he just said, never mind, let's move on to something else. And it was weird. I was like, no, God, we were supposed to make these covenants with God, and it wasn't until later that I read this in the Guide to the Scriptures, and I went, oh, and now I understand why he didn't mention covenants, making these covenants the second week. So in the Guide to the Scriptures, it says, a covenant is an agreement between God and man, but they do not act as equal parts in the agreement. God gives the conditions for the covenant, and men agree to do what he asks them to do. God then promises men certain blessings for their obedience. So I thought that was interesting, that covenants are not something where we sit down and we go, okay, God, I want to be married, and so I'm going to make a covenant with you that if I go to the temple every week, I'm going to find the girl of my dreams next week. Okay, that's not a covenant. In a covenant, God is the one who sets the conditions. He lays out, here's the condition, and here are the blessings that I'll give you if you want to enter into this covenant. And so covenants are extremely sacred things that we don't and shouldn't. That's how I should have said it. We shouldn't take them lightly. I'm so grateful that I have a Father in heaven who offers me covenants, the same covenants that were offered to Abraham and before him with Adam, the same covenants that have been offered to my fathers and my grandparents, my ancestors. The same covenants will be offered to my children and my posterity. I know that through the covenants that I make in the temple, that God has laid out some amazing blessings for me. And so I'm grateful that this week we just get to study this Abrahamic covenant, and hopefully, remember, as we're looking at it, what does it teach me about Heavenly Father? Specifically, what does it teach me about Jesus Christ and his everlasting gospel? Okay, so that's what we get to look at. This one other thing, I just want to mention just briefly, just a little bit about Abraham, one other thing about him. Abraham's mentioned in the Bible, and in the Bible it just says that he knew he needed to find another place to live. And it doesn't say why in the Bible, in Genesis. We just know that he needs to find another place to live. And it isn't until you read the book of Abraham that we have the story of the false priest trying to sacrifice Abraham on the table to their false gods. And then we read the account in Genesis when he said, I needed to find a new place to live. We go, oh, now that makes sense. Like, I understand now why he's got to leave Ur and why he has to go find someplace else to live, because the priests are trying to kill him. But have you ever wondered why they're trying to kill him? Like, what was it? Why him? And so it doesn't tell us in the Bible. It doesn't tell us in the Book of Mormon. It doesn't tell us in the Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price. You have to go to the Quran to kind of get this backstory. Now, having said, let me just say this. I know the Book of Mormon is true. I know the Bible is true, as far as it's been translated correctly. But I really hope this story is true about Abraham in the Quran, because it is so good. And you'll see the story and you'll see, like, that's why they're trying to kill him in the book of Abraham, and that's why he needs to find a place to live, a different place to live in Genesis. This story just kind of goes so well. And so honestly, I was trying to find a better English version of this story. I couldn't really find one very fast, and so I went to Wikipedia, of all places, right? But here's the story of Abraham in the Quran, just told by Wikipedia. And so it's not scriptural language, it's more of the story. So it says in the Quran, he's Ibrahim. And so I'm just going to say Abraham. But Abraham was born in a house of idolaters in the ancient city of Ur of Chaldea. His father, Azar, was a well-known idol sculptor that the people worshipped. As a young man, Abraham used to watch his father sculpting these idols from stone or wood. When his father was done with them, Abraham would ask his father why they could not move or respond to any request, and then would mock them. Despite his opposition to idolatry, his father Azar would still send Abraham to sell these idols in the marketplace. Once there, Abraham would call out to passerbyers, "Who'll buy my idols? They won't help you. They can't hurt you. Who'll buy my idols?" Then Abraham would mock the idols. He would take them to the river, push their faces into the water, and command them, "Drink, drink." Once again, Abraham asked his father, "How can you worship what doesn't see or hear or do any good?" Azar replied, "Dare you to deny the gods of our people? Get out of my sight." Abraham replied, "May God forgive you. No more will I live with you or your idols." After this, Abraham left his father's home for good. During one of the many festivals that would take place in the city, the people would gather in the temple and place offerings of food before their idols. Abraham would ask them, "What are you worshiping? Do these idols hear when you call them? Can they help you or hurt you?" The people would reply, "It is the way of our forefathers." Abraham declared, "I am sick of your gods. Truly, I am their enemy." After several years, Abraham became a young man. He still could not believe that his people were worshiping the statues. He laughed whenever he saw them entering the temple, lowering their heads, silently offering the statues their best of their food, crying and asking forgiveness from them. He started feeling angry towards his people, who could not realize that these are only stones that could neither benefit nor harm them. And then it goes on. Here's the part that I just love. He left his father after he had lost hope to convert him to monotheism and directed his efforts towards the people of the town. But they rejected his call and threatened him. Abraham then hatched a plan to destroy their idols. He knew that a big celebration was coming soon, where everybody would leave town for a big feast on the riverbank. After making sure that nobody was left in town, Abraham went towards the temple armed with an axe. Statues of all shapes and sizes were sitting there, adorned with decorations. Plates of food were offered to them, but the food was untouched. "Well, why don't you eat? The food is getting cold," he said to the statues jokingly. Then with his axe, he destroyed all the statues except for the largest one. He left the axe hanging around the neck of the biggest idol. The polytheists were shocked when they returned and entered the temple. They gathered inside, watching in awe of their gods broken in pieces. They wondered who might have done this. Then they all remembered that the young Abraham was talking evil of their idols. They brought him into the temple and asked him, "Are you the one that has done this to our gods?" Abraham replied, "No. This statue, the biggest of them, has done it. Ask them if they can speak." The polytheist replied, "You know well that these idols don't speak." Abraham then questioned them by saying, "Then how come you worship things that can neither speak nor see or even fend for themselves? Have you people lost your minds?" The polytheist kept silent for a while because he had a point. Then they started yelling at Abraham and shouting, burn him, take revenge for your gods." Okay, now, if you pause right there, then the story of Abraham opening, as the book of Abraham opens up and he has been laid on the altar and the false priest is there and he's going to sacrifice Abraham to his false god, it just makes a little bit more sense. Now, again, it's in the Quran, it's the Wikipedia version that I read, but I love, if even there's just a little bit of if that happened with Abraham, I look up to him for knowing at a young age that, hey, idol worship is not what we should be doing. We should be looking for the true God and making those covenants with him. And so it's a fun story, if none the least, hopefully a very true story. One day I'll ask Abraham, did you really do this? And I'll have that conversation. But enjoy this week. Thank you so very much. As always, the readings, if you don't have time to read them, I'll put them as an audio file for you to listen to. Have a wonderful week, and I'm excited to see what you come up with.